Stephanie Jacobs. There is Anna, Chris, and Benjamin.
I'm sure that you have heard about Hurricane Katrina and the massive flooding that it caused in New Orleans. But what you might not be aware of is the massive devastation the storm caused to South Mississippi. Imagine hundreds-of-year-old homes and history washed away. It took only 8 hours for this storm to damage a 70-mile stretch along South Mississippi. An article posted on FoxNews.com in August 2006 states exactly the overall destruction brought by Hurricane Katrina, which was both a large and powerful hurricane as well as a catastrophic flood, vastly exceeded that of any other major disaster. Have you ever experienced a natural disaster? I want to tell you what Hurricane Katrina was like and the havoc it wreaked along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. Hurricane Katrina is the largest and costliest natural disaster that has ever taken place in the United States. Hurricane Science's website confirms in a case study online that on August 28, 2005, the storm's tropical winds extended 230 miles from the center and peaked as a Category 5 hurricane with winds up to 170 miles per hour. Hurricane Science's case study also reports that when Hurricane Katrina reached the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, the winds were around 130 miles per hour and the storm surged up to 28 high in some places. Overall, this storm impacted the states of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, and caused almost $150 billion in damages. There were over 300,000 homes that were damaged, over 1,800 lives were lost. An online report from the George W. Bush White House Archives explains of the economic impact the storm had on the Gulf Coast. The White House report says the unemployment rate doubled in 1 month due to the storm. More than 7 million gallons of oil spilled into the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. Hurricane Katrina's aftermath consisted of unprecedented damage, both physically and emotionally, along South Mississippi. The Fox News article also states that if the debris from the storm had been stacked on top of the football field, then the top of the debris would reach 10.5 miles high. Miss Anita Lee points out in the book, Katrina, 8 Hours That Changed the Mississippi Coast Forever, that 225 people were killed on the coast of Mississippi as a result of the storm, most of whom drowned. In a Mississippi History Now article, Voices of Katrina, Stephen Sloan tells us that 49 counties in Mississippi were declared federal disaster areas. Jim Frazier explains in his book, Vanished Mississippi Gulf Coast, how multiple historic structures from Ocean Springs, Mississippi to Bay St. Louis were destroyed. Mr. Frazier's book lists some of those more notable structures, such as the Beauvoir, which had been built in 1852 and was the last home of Jefferson Davis, as well as the Magnolia Hotel, which had been built in 1847. Both of those were located in Biloxi, Mississippi. Mr. Frazier also wrote that one famous structure that did withstand Katrina's surge was the famous Biloxi Lighthouse that was built in 1848. This storm took everything from some of its victims. Ms. Lee points out that some took shelter under tents and tarps while searching for any personal belongings they might find among the debris. Items such as baby formula, diapers, and coal were difficult to obtain, but FEMA and American Red Cross distributed what they could. Hurricane Katrina survivors recall memories of the event that are both emotional and captivating. Janice Zulick, a librarian I met at the St. Martin Public Library, told me a story about an elderly couple that had a home near Ocean Springs, near the water, at the time of Hurricane Katrina. Ms. Zulick said that the home had been built in 1859 and that since her friend told her that she would not leave since the house had withstood Hurricane Camille. Ms. Zulick explained that her friends ended up in the attic of the home as the water rose and that the couple had to swim out of the attic and tie themselves to a tree. She didn't proceed any further with the story, and I didn't ask her to because from the tears in her eyes, I assumed that her friends didn't make it. I remember the fear that I felt just a few days before Katrina when I called my friend who lived only 30 minutes away from Biloxi, Mississippi, to ask if he and his family would be leaving before the storm hit. That friend, who is now my husband, had to remain on the coast with his family during the hurricane because they didn't have the money to leave. After calling over 100 times, I finally heard from him a few days after Katrina hit, and I was so thankful and relieved to hear his voice. My husband told me that their house had no damage, but all the surrounding houses were damaged. My husband also said that for the remainder of those 2 weeks without electricity, he helped the National Guard and other military personnel clean out houses and debris among the area. Mr. Sloan tells us in one of his stories how Joel L. Deep of Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, was working at the Emergency Operations Center when Katrina hit. LD said as he stood in almost 20 inches of water, no telephones or radio, he realized this could only get worse. He recalled how he and his co-workers wrote numbers on themselves, then took that same number, wrote it on a piece of paper along with their name, put them in a Ziploc bag, and nailed them to the roof of the building. Just in case anything happened to them, their bodies could be identified. The White House report quotes Mr. Bush saying on September 8, 2005, Hurricane Katrina was one of the worst natural disasters in our nation's history and has caused unimaginable devastation and heartbreak through the Gulf Coast region. As stated previously, millions of people were affected by this storm in many different ways. Some people on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi lost everything that they had. I hope that you have now learned how monumental Hurricane Katrina really was and the true devastation the storm caused to Mississippi. This storm destroyed what took hundreds of years to build. Yet despite this tragedy almost 10 years ago, the Gulf Coast of Mississippi is now booming with business and tourism, just like before. Thank you.